decided to go and check up on how the work was progressing. The closer I got to the storage unit, the louder the sounds of the men working became. There was a clanging of metal on metal, which struck me as odd with the walls being concrete. I made my way around the corner of the building directly opposite and stayed away from the dim glow of the security lights. All 3 doors of the building were open and I could see the 3 men at work. They had knocked down both walls, separating all 3 units, so it was one long rectangular space with 3 sliding doors. The space pods had been unloaded and were set in a row, 12 in all, some 3 feet apart from the wall of the first unit to the wall of the last. They were standing straight up, and through their clear fiberglass tops I could see they were empty. They appeared to have headrests inside. What in the world? Gerald was bolting the last of the pods into place. One of the other men was setting up a small computer station with 3 monitors against the far wall, where the electrical socket was placed. The other man was fiddling with the backs of one of the pods. I made my way back to the trailer without being seen. The trucks hadn't left when Mr. Yellow arrived. He dismissed me with a wave of his fast food breakfast. I made to open the door but stopped. "What are those men working on?" I asked. Mr. Yellow shrugged his fat shoulders and plopped down onto the leather chair. It squeaked and I wondered vaguely how it could hold so much weight. "Fuck if I know," Mr. Yellow said. "See you Wednesday, Dennison." "How's the job, Richie?" "Boring," I lied. I picked up the burger and took a bite big enough to puff out both of my cheeks. "Well, at least it's something until you start picking up some more publication credits, right?" I nodded my head. Cynthia was a dolt. I don't know what Lucy sees in her. I guess once you work with someone long enough, professional camaraderie can eventually slip into friendship complacency. "Luce, Mr. Stevens was an absolute wretch today," Cynthia said, turning to my wife. That was her nickname for my wife. It sounded like Luce. Pulled out his Foley and slung his piss at me and Wilma. I dodged it like the plague, but poor Wilma. More nursing home prattle, always with the prattle. I let my thoughts return to Gerald and his men and the weird pods they had installed. What are they? What were they used for? On the way into work, I passed by one of the newly installed "You'll Do Better in Toledo" signs that had popped up around the city. I corrected the sign in my mind. "You'll do better to avoid Toledo." Mr. Yellow greeted me at the door. "No rounds tonight," he said. "What?" "Don't make no rounds tonight." "Okay. Why?" "That's what Jimmy says. No rounds tonight." I nodded my head but couldn't wipe the confusion from my face. "Look, Mr. Yellow said, just sit in here all night and read your silly little books. Take a nap. I don't care. Just don't go rounding. If anything happens, call the police, I know." "Right. Night." I sat behind the desk, my legs bouncing off the balls of my feet. Don't round tonight. My mum used to tell me not to scratch the bug bites or the poison ivy when I was younger, but I couldn't help myself. As soon as she was out of sight, I dug my nails in deep. I punched in the code and slipped through the gate. I stood listening after it closed again, but heard nothing. I took the long way around the entire facility and moved only in the shadows. I took each step quietly and avoided all the loose gravel and trash. I came around the corner to where Gerald and his pods had been and stood looking at the closed doors. There were no trucks there, no men working that I could see. I snuck over to each of the unit's doors and listened, but heard nothing but the faint buzz of something electrical from within. I pulled the keys from my pocket, but found my hands shaking. I didn't open the door. Not then. I stood there with the breath caught in my throat and pussied out. I stuffed the keys back in my pocket and stalked back to the trailer. I tried to read but couldn't focus. I trained my eyes on the type and turned the pages, but the stories remained unheard. All I could see was the standing pods. Images of what could fill them flashed through my mind. Little green men, werewolves, unconscious people. What did the pods do? I left the trailer to find out. I had my fingers on the keypad when the truck pulled up, Gerald's contracting construction painted on the hood. The horn honked, and I moved aside so the driver could pull up to the gate. He rolled down the window, and I saw that it was Gerald. "No rounding tonight, Sonny," he said. I didn't know what to say. "Open her up." I punched in the code, and the truck passed through. There were no pods in the back, but two other men in the cab with Gerald. I watched the truck's taillights round a corner to the rear, then the gate slid shut. I smoked a misty ultra and paced the length of the gate until it was gone. Curiosity killed the cat, I thought. Then images of strange cat-faced men howling mutely behind the plexiglass flourished in my head. "God damn it," I said and punched in the code. The doors were closed, but both of Gerald's trucks were parked in front of the storage unit. The buzzing from within was louder. There were other noises too. Strange noises, the banging of metal on metal, tiny whimpers that shouldn't have been audible but seemed somehow amplified. A terse foreign tongue barking some strange-sounding language I couldn't place. I crept closer, taking each step as if on a tightrope. The closer I got, the more confused by the speaker from within I became. It didn't sound like any language I'd heard before. I mean, Toledo isn't the most diverse place on God's green earth, but it's not exactly vanilla either. I put my hands on the farthest door to the left. It seemed to hum with some electrical impulse. It didn't shock me exactly, but as I placed my hands on it, I felt the hair on the back of my neck and arms stand on end. What the... I put my ear to the door and all of the sounds stopped. I jerked my head back as if I'd been slapped. I stepped back, made to run. I thought I'd been heard or felt, detected somehow, as if I'd disturbed the energy emanating from within. Then all the air around me surged forward toward the unit. It was as if some great beast suddenly woke from its slumber with a start. I was balanced precariously on my left foot, moving to take a step back when it happened. I was pulled forward and stumbled, catching myself with my hands with a thump against the door. That time I was shocked by the door. My hands buzzed with the charge. It wasn't the usual pop and jolt of touching an electric fence. This was a hum and pull like a great unseen body of water, a drafting ocean's consuming undertow. My body was swept from the pavement and pressed against the door as if by magnet. My eyes filled with tears, and the insides of my nostrils prickled like I had to sneeze the worst sneeze of my life. I pushed back with everything I had, but couldn't break free. I hung there like a bug in a zapper, helpless. Then all at once it stopped. I slid off the door into a heap on the pavement. My arms and legs felt heavy, thick and wooden. It took me some time to regain use of them. I rose on unsteady legs and wobbled away from the unit. It took me the rest of the night to recover the comfort and ease of my body. This must be what it's like learning how to walk again, I thought. Mr. Yellow came with the morning, but the trucks remained inside the facility. I checked my watch walking down the stairs and nearly stumbled when I saw the little metal hands bend forward, their points dug deep into the watch face. Tiny spiderwebs of cracks spiraled away from where they touched, like the broken surface of a clear lake. The next night I watched as a red pickup passed through the gate. About an hour later, a man on foot emerged from inside the facility and knocked on the trailer's door. Maureen's hair seemed to blow in the wind with the pounding from the other side. "Come in," I shouted. The door opened and the man came in. His face was creased with a frown. "I don't know how, but I backed into the building," he said. "What?" "Come on," he said, leaving the door open for me to follow. The man had pulled into his unit, one directly across from the spacepod building. The rear end of his truck was crunched into the middle door of the spacepod building. How the hell? I don't know. I came to change my oil and serpentine belt, and when I finished it was like someone had smashed in the pedal and I couldn't get the truck to stop. I walked into the man's unit. There was a little puddle of oil near the front, surrounded by a plethora of tools and toolboxes. The man used his unit as his garage. I followed the path of his truck from his unit across the pavement. There were burnt tire tracks all the way. The man had locked the brakes trying to stop, but it hadn't done any good. We went back to the trailer and called for the police to make an accident report. A strange thing happened when the officer, young and fresh out of the academy, was busy with the paperwork. There was another suck of the air around the spacepod unit, much weaker than the night before. Then the security lights dimmed and the police cruiser's lights blinked, and the siren began a wail but stifled it like a yawn. All three of us, the driver of the truck, the police officer, and myself, looked up and paused, but did not comment. A couple of hours later, the lights in the trailer blinked and nearly went out. The hum of the fan slowed, but the pause was so brief the fan did not have time to stop spinning completely before it picked back up. Something weird's going on with those space pods. Another 2 hours passed, and one of Gerald's trucks pulled up to the gate and honked. This one had a truck topper covering the bed. There were no windows on it, and I could not see what the truck was carrying, if it was carrying anything at all. I opened the door, went to the window and peered in. Gerald was behind the wheel. "Open the gate," he said. I lit a misty and inhaled deeply. I shuddered, fighting back a cough. "Open the gate, asshole," he said. "What's in the space pods?" "What?" "The space pods you've got in the unit. What's in 'em?" "None of your damn business. Open the gate." We stared at each other through squinted eyes. Then I sighed and punched in the code. The first hint of the morning sun was blanching the sky over the Maumee. I made to check the time on my watch and stared at my naked wrist for several seconds before remembering that the pods had killed the thing. Shit, I thought. I didn't work again until Wednesday. I got there just at dusk, the security lights tinkling into life throughout store all. It wasn't 30 minutes into my shift when the power faltered. This time the fan had time to stop completely before resuming its spinning. "That's it," I said to myself. "Time to figure this shit out." As I made to open the door, the truck with the topper pulled up. Great. I went through my process of making Gerald wait, smoking my cigarette all the way down to the filter before approaching the window and letting him in. "What's in the back?" I asked. Gerald jerked his head around. I followed the truck through the gate at a trot and changed to a stroll, doing my best not to show how winded the short jog had made me, as he was stepping out onto the pavement. "What are you doing here?" "Making my rounds," I said, lighting another misty. "You know, being security and all." He didn't shut the driver's side door right away. He looked at me then at the truck topper like he was calculating something in his head. He shut the door and said, "None of your business. Make your rounds." He leaned against the truck and folded his arms. There was nothing to do but go. It felt like my tail was between my legs, but I made sure not to show that he'd won. I sauntered by as if that's what I had planned to do all along. I circled back around and approached from the way I had come. Gerald was waiting for me, leaning against the side of the building, all but hidden in the shadows. I jumped and felt my face flush red when he spoke. "Are we going to have a problem?" he asked. I didn't reply. "Am I going to have to tell Mr. Klobbs that you're harassing a paying customer?" "No, sir," I said. I spun on my heels and trudged back to the trailer. The truck left some short time later. It wasn't an hour and a half before it returned, though. I opened the gate for him without so much as a word passing between us. Just as the gate was starting to close, it staggered and stopped. The security lights blinked off. Gerald's truck's lights and engines cut out. The truck kept moving as if pulled. It drifted on toward the back of the facility for some 15 seconds or so. Then, all at once, all the power returned. The security lights glowed back to life. The tail lights of the truck burned red, and the gate shuddered forward and closed. The truck left, then returned within 2 hours. This continued until the sun rose and I left. "What's with that Gerald guy and that back unit?" Mr. Yellow harumphed. "I thought they were just going to knock down a wall to make the place bigger," I said. "Seems like they've been at it for quite some time." "So? Just wondering." He left and the night came. The power surged, stronger and longer in duration than before. Gerald's truck pulled up, the one with the covered bed, and I let him through. He left and within 2 hours returned again. This happened throughout the night until the morning arrived and Mr. Yellow relieved me. "Why don't you give Gerald the code for the gate?" I asked. "If Jimmy wanted to, he would have," Mr. Yellow said. Fair enough, I thought. I went home and wrote a story about the space pods. In it, the truck was bringing imprisoned aliens to the unit for rehabilitation. Their ship had crashed somewhere in Lake Erie, and a coalition of alien lovers broke them out of a secret government prison. They were nursing the little green men back to health and sending distress signals to their people some many light years away. I watched for more clues the next night. The power surges seemed to be growing stronger and stronger. Gerald's schedule seemed to be to come and go every 2 hours. Weird, I thought as I scribbled it all down into my notebook. I found myself watching the sky every time I stepped out to smoke a misty. Flying saucers and little green men. What sort of writing hack had I become, I wondered. Gerald pulled up and I let him through. I finished the story about the heroics of the alien rescuers and sent it off. Bradley Kubrick was the protagonist, and as a reward for his service, he was taken away to live forever with those he risked his life for. It was rejected by 12 of the 13 science fiction magazines I shopped it to. The 13th was an online-only magazine, but it was another credit on the old CV. The limo glided up and entered. I don't know where I had been, somewhere near the middle of a confederacy of dunces. I saw the flash of the brake lights. I let the book fall to the desk and hurried to follow it. I made it into my secret spying unit as the first glows of green burst through my peephole. I climbed up and watched. The blob had a brunette in a skimpy cocktail dress on the floor. Her head was being enveloped. She moaned and whimpered slightly, a near sexual sound. Her eyes were expressionless and her mouth was open in a pout. Her lips were ruby red with lipstick and her toe and fingernails matched. I watched as the woman's face dissolved into the greenery. Halfway down her long, slender neck, the small bulb above the monster and its prey flashed and then faded into darkness. I felt a pull in the air, and my face was pressed into the peephole against my will. The blob and the woman and the limo outside were all pulled several inches eastward toward the spacepod unit. "What in the hell?" a woman's voice within the green blob shouted. The suction surged once, twice, then resolved to stillness. The light above the blob blinked back on. The limo driver emerged in the foot of the door, looking wide-eyed. "Did you feel that, madam?" "Of course I felt it, you idiot," the blob spat. "What was it?" "I do not know, madam." "Well, go find out." The driver turned and fled from sight. The green blob seemed to fade a bit, and the brunette's body fell limply to the cement. "Fucking hell," the blob said. Bits of a pale woman smeared and stretched appeared in the green mist. The green intensified until the anatomy of the woman elongated and returned to a solid green. The brunette was lifted into the air and the blob resumed its meal. I climbed down from my perch and quietly left the unit. I snuck around the corner of the building, trying to dart looks in all directions at once, and made my way toward the space pod unit. As I was crossing the main drive, which led to the gate and the trailer, I saw the Leatherman's sedan driving through. Sweet Jesus, I thought. All the freaks are here at the same time. I stood there in the middle of the drive and let the headlights grow until the car stopped at my feet. The man in leather got out and stood looking at me, doe-eyed in the lights. "What is wrong, Mr. Dennison?" he asked. "Now is not the best time for you to be here." "I have to do my duty." I swallowed and nodded my head. "How do you argue with a sadistic serial murderer?" "Answer, you don't." He retrieved the hefty man from the trunk. The man had to weigh 250. He was out cold. The man in leather lifted him with only the slightest strain. The cords of muscles leaped, but his breath remained steady. "The quota must be met." I nodded my head. Of course the quota had to be met. Worry not about the people-eating green blob or the weirdness coming from the space pods. He let the man drop to the floor and set up his hooks. "There will come a time, sometime very soon, I think," he said, setting the hooks into the man's back, "where this will be a thing forgotten. As I said, I think I am the last." The fat man woke with bulging eyes. Spit flew from his mouth as well as a yowl any street cat would shed one of its lives for. The man in leather set the other hook, then spread out the plastic. "It is imperative you write my story, Mr. Dennison." The fat man held his breath like a child going through a tunnel or over a bridge, as if he thought the pain would relent if he stopped breathing. I guess he was right, kind of. A scream tore through the night from somewhere outside that unit. The leather man and I stood staring at each other. All was quiet then, except for the steady drip-drop of the fat man's blood. "What's going on, Mr. Dennison?" "I have no clue." The man in leather turned to the fat man and slit his throat with a speed and lack of hesitancy that made my head spin. It was something akin to taking out the garbage, something that required no thought, no emotion, nothing other than the flick of the wrist and a split second. We stepped out and stood listening. "Dennis!" a woman's voice called. "Dennis?" I recognized it, but it took me a moment in my muddled state to place it with the woman that was the green blob. "Shit," I said. I made to move back inside the unit, but she rounded the corner of the building and saw us. "Where is my driver?" she shouted. She stood, stark naked, some 20 yards away at the end of the building. "What have you done with Dennis? He better be unharmed." "Who's Dennis?" the man in leather asked me. "Her driver," I whispered. "Who is she?" "You don't want to know." She put her hands on her bare hips. Her legs were a shoulder's length apart. "You don't want to make me angry," she said. Images of the Hulk, Banner's transformation, flashed in my head, and I couldn't help but smile. I loved that shit when I was a kid. The man in leather turned around and looked at the dead man in his unit. "I don't think we have your Dennis," he said. The woman stared at us, hard, then stomped away eastward. Her bare feet made a smacking sound on the pavement. "I think you should go, Mr. Dennison." I nodded and went. "Miss," I called. "Miss?" No answer. I walked toward the spacepod unit, looking down each lane between the buildings. The place was empty, it seemed. "Miss." I came to the last building. The middle door was open. The green light pulsed from within. It was a short walk that seemed to take a long time. I held my breath and peeked inside. The blaring of the horn caught me completely off guard. I leapt back and knocked my head against the cement wall of the building. I collapsed to my knees and held my head. Bright lights blinded me and the world spun. The last thing I saw was Gerald running past me and through the door of the storage unit. Sleeping on the job is a good way to get your ass canned. My eyes, crusted and heavy, opened and Mr. Yellow's ugly face slowly came into focus. I tried to shake my head, but a wave of nausea swept over me, and I stilled myself. What? That was all I could manage. It felt like there was an angry hive of bees swarming between my ears. I could feel the pulse in my temples beating like a gong. "Jesus, kid," Mr. Yellow said, "go home." "Have you noticed anything weird?" I asked. Mr. Yellow rose from the leather chair. "What?" "Weird, you know, like out of the ordinary." "Are you high?" Mr. Yellow asked. I think it was more of a rhetorical question. "No." He grunted and made for the door. "Seriously," I said, grabbing his sweaty forearm. He looked down at my hand, then into my eyes. He looked pissed. I let go of his arm. "Like any power outages or anything like that?" "No." He narrowed his eyes and studied my face. "Is there anything you need to tell me?" he asked. "I think there's a fucked up science experiment involving aliens in one of the units. A leather fetishist serial killer in another. Oh yeah, and a beautiful woman that transforms into a people-eating green blob." I shook my head, thinking maybe I was high. Or maybe losing my mind. "Try and stay awake tonight," Mr. Yellow said, "if you can manage it." I went through the gate as soon as Mr. Yellow was out of sight. I walked down each of the lanes between the unit buildings, but the place was empty. Dusk hung in the air like it was doing everything it could to stave off the night. The security lights blinked on and glowed weakly. I made my way to the space pod building just as the night won out. The sky was dark, not a star to be seen in Toledo's light pollution. I kept my distance from the units, standing some 10 feet away and just looking at them, waiting. I felt the air still then surge forward. The security lights flashed, then went out. I stumbled forward but leaned back with all of my weight. I must look like one of those Weather Channel reporters in a hurricane, I thought. The pull stopped, and I fell backwards onto my arse on the hard pavement. The doors of the unit building began to tremble, then shake. "What the—" The doors jerked upward, and from the darkness within, 12 pale shapes emerged. They were man-like 2 legs, 2 arms, a head. But that's where the similarities ended. They were completely devoid of color, nearly transparent. Their bodies were nearly featureless. They had no eyes, no noses, no ears, no body hair. They had long pale fingernails, more claws than nails, really. In the middle of their faces was a circular hole. Assholes? They definitely looked every bit the sphincter. They stepped out on the pavement on toeless feet. All of the hair on my body stood and leaned toward them like a shaded plant reaching for the sun. My body felt leaden, heavy. My arms lifted without my command and extended toward the creatures. What is happening? They moved slowly but steadily forward toward me. I could not move on my own accord. It was terrifying. Their asshole mouths began to open as they closed in on me. They were completely lined with nearly translucent teeth, like those on a gar, but in the mouth of a lamprey. Somewhere to my right, I heard the high whine of an engine. All 12 of the creatures stopped and turned their asshole faces toward the sound. The Leatherman's sedan mowed through the crowd, sending some of them flying through the air, some thumping under the wheels. One smashed into the unit building beside me and went limp on the pavement not 3 feet away. Its smell was overwhelming. It was a mixture of something strangely earthly, like freshly tilled cemetery dirt, and something wholly chemical. It made my eyes water. The sedan came screeching to a halt, and the man in leather stuck his head from the open window. "Get in, Mr. Dennison." I found I had control of my body again and got into the car. "They are electromagnetic vampires," the man in leather said. "What?" "They feed on human blood. They render their victims paralyzed through a blast of electromagnetic currents." I think I am high. Or highly insane, I thought. He whipped the car around the corner of one of the unit buildings and sped toward the gate. How? Gerald Finch Godwin. He locked the brakes in time to avoid slamming into the slowly opening gate. The contracting guy. The very same. The car hurtled through the gate, out of the parking lot and onto South Ave. "Where are we going?" His leather gloves were fingerless. His hands continuously tightened, then loosened, then doubled his grip on the steering wheel. The streets were empty. The traffic lights blinked their signals, but the man in leather did not heed them. He blasted through a red light on Adams, and the car was briefly flashed by the traffic cam. "You just got a ticket," I said. "No plates," he said. I smiled. I hated those goddamn traffic cams, and I couldn't help but feel good at being able to stick it to them for once, even if it was vicariously through the driving of a psychopath. "Who are you?" I asked. He let his eyes drift in my direction, but did not answer. The city blurred by in the window, and we rode in silence. The highway turned and crossed the dark and quiet Mormie. The casino blurred by, and the man in leather took an exit. I'd never been to this part of the city, never had a reason to. I wasn't a laborer, didn't work on the refinery or the barges. The sedan moved swiftly through the empty streets, swerving to miss the crater-sized potholes. "If you want me to write your story, I need to know more about you." The man in leather smiled. It was not a pleasant thing. "I'm not from around here," he said. I thought of the space pods and the alien-like creatures. It dawned on me they were vampires, real-life vampires. "What the fuck, Toledo?" "Where are you from?" "It's not really important. I was born twice." I twisted under the seatbelt to get a better look at him. He pulled the car into a parking lot in front of what the city would call a blighted warehouse. He cut the engine and sat staring straight ahead with his gloved hands in his leather-clad lap. "First to my mother, secondly to man," he said. "I am a servant of man, you see. I am one, probably the last living member of the Order. We keep it all moving. The world is made of blood and fueled by blood." I believed him. I just saw electromagnetic vampires. I saw a green blob that feasts on women. I wouldn't have been surprised to know the world is actually a living, breathing creature that also fed on men and women. "Are you talking about the world or just Toledo?" I asked. He looked at me fully then. "Does it really matter?" he asked. "If it were just Toledo, is that such a small thing to lose? It would spread from here." I nodded but didn't really understand. "You don't have it in you, or I'd make you successor. You're weak in that respect, Mr. Dennison." This shamed me and my face flushed, a mass murderer informing me that I didn't have the grit to do what he did. Somewhere in the back of my head I understood the absurdity of that, but it was somewhere really, really, really far back there. "I could try," I said. I tried to imagine myself, leather-clad, lifting some warm, unmoving person up off the cold cement floor of a storage unit and hanging them by their flesh on suspended hooks. I tried to imagine using the collection of knives the man kept. I tried to imagine rending the flesh meat and the whole into parts. I couldn't. "Don't be ashamed," he said. "We all have our stations. I was destined to keep it all running. You were destined to tell my story. Whether or not it all continues is destined to be seen. Perhaps the order is destined to starve off, and a new order will take its place. He opened the door and got out. I followed. The night felt chillier than it should have been, at least that's how it seemed to me. Maybe it was a mental quavering from seeing so much weirdness. Unholy Toledo, I remember thinking. Unholy Toledo. Holy Toledo, holy Toledo. The door to the warehouse stood open. Darkness yawned out from within. The man in leather, who had been born 2 times, did not hesitate. He walked into the darkness as if it were another form of light, which I guess it was. I looked around before following him. There wasn't anything moving, nobody near. What shreds of rationality remained in me told me the man was a killer and we were alone. Therefore, I was in danger. The other part of me I have since dubbed as Holy Toledoan reminded me the man could have killed me at least 12 times since I'd discovered him. In all probability, 100 times moreover, since he seemed to know all about me before I even learned of his existence. I followed the man into the darkness. Here, I couldn't see anything. I took hesitant, careful steps toward the voice. You are almost there. The voice didn't sound nearer. It didn't sound as if I had made any progress toward it at all. Do not be afraid. I trembled. My right foot bumped into something hard. I reached out and felt the wall. It was smooth, too smooth to be the wall of some abandoned warehouse. It felt polished and luxurious, the gilded wall of a palace. And then there was light. The man in leather scratched a match into life. The hollow cheeks stood in stark contrast to his full beard. His eyes glittered in the dancing flame. He leaned forward and lit a candle, then dropped the match, letting it burn itself out on the floor. This is where I was born for the 2nd time, Mr. Dennison. He lifted the candle, which I saw was in an ornate holder carved into some intricate shape I couldn't quite place in the dim lighting, and lit several more just above where my hands had felt. The place began to take shape. The walls gleamed golden in the shaking light. The floor ascended by a row of steps stretching out beyond the candle's luminance. This is where I will make my final testament, be absolved of my failures, reap what I have sown, and pass from this plane. His face turned from mine, and he walked up the stairs. There were 9 of them. At the top was a stage of sorts. A pulpit is perhaps the better term. He turned up there and lifted his chin. His eyes were covered in the shadows of his beard and cheeks. He looked eyeless. I suddenly felt surrounded by hundreds of unseen spirits. The place felt claustrophobic, oppressive, mass attendance in St. Peter's Square tight. Ghosts upon ghosts upon ghosts. I stared up at the man, and he looked every bit the Old Testament character. The leather clothing looked less hard rock gay and more skin of my enemies tough. I was brought here, taken from the ones that birthed me. I was given the choice to return to the world outside or enter the world of the ancient machine. The beast, we call it. That's what it is, I thought, not surrounded by ghosts, but in the den of some giant sleeping monster. You see and you don't see. There are monsters visible and monsters hidden. The beast requires blood to keep the hidden hidden. Green blobs, electromagnetic vampires. What else was out there? We are at the end of the line. The beast stirs, grows unsatisfied. The order has failed. Maybe the beast's eyes were slitted. Maybe it was feigning sleep. I backed away from the stairs, retreating into the darkness. You can call me Om, the lullaby of the beast. The truck pulled into the parking lot, and Gerald Finch Godwin stepped out. He opened the door of the trailer and stood there. "We need to talk," he said. We did. "There is something in that unit that you don't understand. Couldn't possibly understand." "Don't need to understand," he said. "You understand?" I nodded, but he continued. Those creatures are essential. They are harvesters, Gerald said. Harvesters? The world runs on blood, he said. How was this something I hadn't known until so recently? The very fundamental cause of perpetuation. I blinked like a school kid. I've been feeding them, he said. The covered bed of the pickup truck. Nobody special, he said quickly. I guess he thought I was going to argue that everyone had worth, so he hurried on. No one that civilization needs. Not the important ones, just drifters and throwaways. They have grown much quicker than I had anticipated. They are old enough to hunt for themselves. They feel compelled to. The power surges. Feed, 7,765 seconds is 1,291 hours, he said. What? The seventh letter, the sixth twice, then the fifth. 7665. Feed. We stared at each other in silence. I didn't know what to say. What are they? I asked finally. The order has died, but the quota must be met. I made them. They are ones and zeros and skin and bones. The beast will be fed. Do not interfere. Gerald Finch Godwin turned on his heels and left the door open. I wrote Om's story. I sent it off. It came back in my stamped, self-addressed envelopes. I reworked it, adding in an imperative undercurrent of bloodthirst, and sent it off again. The limo did not return. I wondered if the blob had died. I didn't know how I felt about it. The weeks passed with the power surges and the screams in the night. I did not make rounds. I did not leave the trailer. Gerald stopped coming. The harvesters could feed themselves. On a Wednesday, just before heading off to the store all, I got a letter. It was from a little magazine called Horror of Horrors. They accepted Om's story. It would be published on their website and in their tabloid-style magazine. I brought the letter to work with me, hoping to show him. He did not return either. I'm not sure what that story has caused. I'm not sure anybody read it. I was paid in copies of the magazine, and I went out to every bookstore I could find in Toledo, Ann Arbor, and Detroit, but couldn't find a copy of it on the shelves. The other stories in the magazine were just as strange as my own. They all were fantastic and dark, worlds of bloody requirements and sacrifices. A letter to the editor on the magazine's last page read, "All will be well, the harvest has come. O.M. Primitive Lucas Mangum." For Galloway editor's note, the pages that follow were found among the belongings of a Professor Walton Roberts, who disappeared somewhere in the Tatoosh wilderness near the town of Paradise, Washington, along with his 3 companions, programmer Brian Hobbs, professional mover Hank Sullivan, and corporate banker Tony Tabbs. Along with these papers, authorities discovered remains of an illegal campsite, and an RV registered to Tabbs was found abandoned on the outskirts of Paradise. Additionally, evidence suggests the missing men may have engaged in the illicit killings of several wolves in the area. As of this writing, no other trace of these 4 men has been uncovered. It has also been speculated their disappearance is somehow tied to a series of nearby child murders and the vanishing of a Ms. Luca Barath, whose own son was a suspect in the killings. However, no evidence linking these tragedies has ever been found. Moon Mountain. We loaded up Tony's RV on Thursday evening. It was Memorial Day weekend. The semester was over. Tony and Brian had taken off from their jobs, and Hank had been laid off again. The stars had aligned perfectly. I had 5 whole days away from it all. 5 days with my high school buddies. Men I hadn't seen in almost 15 years. For most of those 15 years, we talked about doing something like this, but nothing materialized until now. It couldn't have come at a better time either. Not for me, anyway. I'd just lost custody of my son, Wiley. Apparently, my ex-wife and the judge she was fucking determined my drinking was a detriment to my parenting. Never mind I only drank at night. Never mind I didn't black out. Never mind I still held down my tenured position at California State University's Department of History. Of course, Ayla was a good lay. That probably had some bearing on the Honorable Alexander Smart's ruling. Not that I could prove anything was going on. Anyway, I planned to get my son back, but first I needed some time away. 4 nights in the Tatoosh Range should do the trick. As we packed the RV with supplies, Tony's wife made barbecue, short ribs and mashed potatoes. His twin daughters chased the family German Shepherd around the expansive front lawn. The sun was setting too fast, but I tried not to think about it. We hadn't planned this trip, so I could worry about time. When we finished, the 7 of us sat down to one of the best meals I'd had in years. I felt like a man who'd just gotten out of prison. It took all I had not to devour the food in an embarrassingly short amount of time. Ayla was a shit cook, not like Tony's wife, Yvette, at all. That wasn't the only way they differed. Ayla had small tits and practically no arse. She was pasty-faced, and her hair was damaged from frequent dyeing. Yvette, on the other hand, was thick where it counted, dark-skinned, and her hair was a nest of sensuous braids. Tony Tabbs had a good life. Though he had grown up in the same low-income cesspool as the rest of us, he'd turned out okay. He was vice president of corporate banking at a Sacramento financial institution. He had a house in El Dorado Hills, 2 beautiful twin girls, and an obedient but intimidating dog. Plus, he got to nail Yvette whenever he wanted. I wasn't jealous of him or anything, but sometimes I wished my life was as sweet. It was nice of him to share the wealth this weekend. After dinner, Tony and Yvette put the girls to bed, while Brian, Hank and I sat on the back deck drinking High West campfire whiskey. Brian did most of the talking. Found out after college he was into dicks, which was fine, long as he didn't touch mine. One high school experience aside, I just wasn't into gay shit. On this night, while Hank and I watched the stars and moon come out, Brian went on about how welcoming the tech world was to people like him. He talked about his 3 cats, an orange tabby named Eva, a grey and white domestic shorthair named Jack, and Oliver, who looked like he was crossbred with a skunk in all his pictures. He said he wasn't dating anyone seriously, but was still having fun and not exactly ready to settle down. I nodded here and there and told him that was good. Hank didn't say shit. I always thought he might be a bit homophobic. Just a bit, though. I mean, he wouldn't have stayed friends with us if it bothered him that much. Of course, maybe he had nothing against gay men at all. Maybe he was just quiet because, like me, he was also recently divorced and having no fun being single, whereas Brian seemed to be enjoying himself. Either way, I think we were all ready to hit the road. Tony came outside with a big grin on his face. "You guys save enough campfire for me?" "Sure, man, you got a glass?" Hank asked and proffered the bottle. Tony waved it away. "Kidding. Since it's my rig, I'll drive first. Give you guys a chance to sober up." "I'm sober," Brian said. "Perfectly sober." "With you I could never tell," Tony said. "You've only ever had 1 gear." "I can drive if you need me to," Brian said. "Nah, I'd rather start us out." Tony opened his palm to show us the keys. "Finish those shots, boys. We got a lot of miles ahead." Tony went inside. Hank grimaced as he knocked back the remnants of his booze. I held my nose and did the same. Brian had no trouble putting the rest of the whiskey down. He slammed his glass on the nearest tabletop and nodded. We all got up and followed Tony through the house. At the front door, Yvette hugged all of us. She lingered on me and told me to take care of Tony. I told her I would, and then she released me and gave Tony a goodbye kiss. I tried not to stare, but the slurp of their tongues was hard to ignore. Hank sat up front with Tony. Brian lay down on one of the RV's built-in beds. I sat all the way in the back to try writing something. I'd told myself I'd get some writing done on this trip. Unfortunately, I had no idea where to start. It had been a while since I'd written fiction. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd tried. Though I still sometimes called myself a novelist, I'd only published one book when I was in my mid-20s. A mystery novel called The Hangman's Gambit. It had done okay, but not good enough to launch my career. Turned out I was better suited for academics. Still, there's something inside me that yearned for release. Could be another book. But sometimes it felt more primal than that, like inside of me lay a dormant monster caged by modern society, more specifically caged by me, who was deceived by modern society's perceived treasures. I sometimes thought maybe this same sleeping hunger dwells in all of us, but Tony seems pretty content, Brian too. Even Hank, through simplification forced upon him by poverty, might have it figured out. Could be they're lying. That's always possible. Could also be they're still riding a high and haven't come down yet. Either way, they're different from me. I'm aware of this monster. Sometimes I'm so aware, I feel like it will tear itself out of me. The drive from El Dorado Hills to Paradise, Washington, is somewhere between 12 and 13 hours. We made good time by driving in shifts and peeing in the RV's bathroom. We reached Rainier National Park around 8 in the morning, local time. I was last to drive, and I parked us in the common lot. The four of us split the cost of parking, as if we fully intended on camping where we were allowed. As soon as I got out of the RV, I noticed a difference in the air. It was so much cleaner than city air, but somehow also more textured. As well as its damp, earthy quality, I detected the sweet, strong smell of the evergreen and the smokiness of nearby campfires. I already felt much better. From the lot, we hiked up to Moon Mountain and wandered from the trail when we were sure no one was around to notice. Only the trees watched. They stood all around us like many-limbed sentries, decked in myriad shades of green and capable of only swaying. Tony said he knew where he was going. We all just went along with it. In a clearing on the side of the mountain, we set up camp. Tony and Hank got a fire going. I gathered stumps and stones for us to sit on. Brian grilled up some meat patties he'd formed and seasoned back home. We ate them on sesame buns with spicy mustard and American cheese. Afterwards, we sat around the fire. Tony broke out the whiskey. We sat silent. Tony opened his backpack and dug out several items I, at first, couldn't identify. As he began to snap the pieces together, I realized what they were, what the pieces made up. "You brought your gun?" Hank said, beating me to the punch. Tony grinned. "Didn't you, white boy?" "Nah, I had to sell mine a while back." Without getting up, Tony dragged the bag over to Hank. "Lucky for you, I brought an extra." Hank immediately started rooting through the bag for the other disassembled rifle. Tony nodded toward Brian and me. "What about you two?" "I brought this," Brian said, patting the machete sheathed on the side of his bag. "I didn't bring anything larger than a buck knife," I said. I neglected to mention that for the last 3 years I'd written numerous letters advocating for stricter gun laws and campaigned against animal cruelty. Tony nodded and kept putting the gun together. When he finished, he racked it and turned to look me at me, eyes blazing but features otherwise unmoving. "Seen you looking at my wife back there," he said. I sniffed. My eyes shifted. My brain fumbled for something to say. No need denying it. No need to be ashamed either. She's a fine piece of woman. "Yeah," I croaked. "You want her?" "What?" "You heard me." Well, I felt myself shrink inside. This was going to get bad. I held his gaze, though. Even with that gun in Tony's hands, I didn't want to show him, or the others, any signs of weakness. I licked my lips, but had no spit. I blinked. He started laughing. The others joined him, albeit shakily. I tried to grin, but imagined I was grimacing. The laughter died down. Just fucking with you, man. What happened with you and yours, anyhow? I shrugged. Didn't work out, I guess. Hank finished his shot and poured himself another. Come on, man. Gotta be more to the story than that. She fuck around on you? Tony asked. I don't know. Tony raised his eyebrows. You fuck around on her? No, we just grew apart. That's all. Tony eyed me another few seconds. It felt like a full minute. Finally, he nodded. That's some shit. I drank the rest of my shot and relished its burn. Then I poured another. Yeah, I said. Yeah, that's some shit. We all went silent again for a while. Hank broke it by saying he was glad we finally got to do this. We finished our whiskey and retired to our tents to nap for a little. No one had really done much sleeping during the drive. An hour or two of shut-eye would do us some good. I didn't sleep, though. I lay awake with a large rock pressing into my lower back. I thought about Tony asking me if I wanted to fuck his wife. Tony with his immovable gaze. Tony with his rifle. I thought I'd hear that weapon cocking the rest of my life. I'd been friends with him the longest. He'd been on the football team, but once that season ended, he ran indoor and outdoor track. Had we gone to different schools, we'd have been fierce rivals. Since we were on the same team, our competition stayed friendly. We were constantly trying to outdo each other. Sometimes my time would be better. Other times, he'd outpace me. In 10th grade, he invited me to a party with his football teammates. The cops had shown up, and the two of us escaped together, running like mad through an open field and ducking into a patch of woods, trying to hold in our laughter as flashlight beams scanned the area. After that, we were inseparable until he left community college for business school. We'd stayed in contact, though, mostly through social media, where we watched each other settle into careers and suburban domesticity. I wondered if he would have shot me earlier had I answered his question about Yvette in the affirmative. Nah, I thought. Not Tony. He isn't a killer. None of us are. Even as I thought this, I reminded myself you can never really know anyone. A fact that had become all too clear during the dissolution of my marriage. Not long after Wiley's birth, it dawned on me that though Ayla loved me, she didn't like me. I saw it in her eyes whenever we had people over, and I'd go off about politics or religion. Usually these rants came out after 4 or 5 drinks. When she and I met, we enjoyed debating these topics. She identified as Christian. I was spiritual, not religious. She considered herself a moderate Republican. I never voted. We came together on a few key things. First, we enjoyed the